So it's so sad that young people are moving out of the global south, especially moving out of Africa, which is why some of us have been writing. We need to, for those who have the resources, we need to create livable villages, not just build a house there and live. If you go to some of the villages now,
You are listening to NIMDA Talk.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to come your way once again. I hope you are all doing well. I'm glad that you can join us today for a very interesting discussion. I have another guest joining me all the way from a country very far from England, and I will ask my guest today to introduce himself. Hello, who do we have here today?
good evening, that's my time here. Good morning, whenever you be hearing this. My name is Professor Paul Iji. I'm Nigerian by birth. I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor in charge of research and innovation at Fiji National University. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of New England, which may be more familiar to some of you, that is in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. It's a very good pleasure to have your distinguished self with us today. Fiji, for our friends who have a very poor geography background, whereabout in the world is that?
Yeah, that I know many people wouldn't know where it is located, but it's located in the South Pacific, one of the South Pacific islands, and it prides itself by the peace and beauty of the islands. About 300 islands inhabited, and they call themselves the paradise, and that is not far-fetched because it's quite a peaceful area to live in.
Hmm, that's interesting. Prof, from Nigeria to paradise, how did that journey how did that journey begin? I'm really interested in how your upbringing as a child and how you really got into sort of high education administration. How was growing up in Nigeria?
I think I've ever been fascinated by distant places, I would say. And that started probably when I was in year 4 in primary school. We had a large map of the world on one of the walls in the classrooms. And we used to look at that map and wonder because they tried to teach us world time, I think. So they had things like when Nigerians are rising for breakfast, the people in Australia are going to bed, and all that. And so I got fascinated by distant places, which is why I probably ended up in a lot of distant places from home, including where I am currently.
Mm, that's interesting. So, um, growing us up as a child, and what were your career aspirations? I mean, most of us, at least from my experience in Ghana, when we were growing up, we say, "I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a lawyer." How was growing up for you? What were your aspirations as a child?
I think honestly, I grew up in the village and my parents were both farmers. My father was the village head and he had a lot of lands. I don't know why I thought so. He was seen to be one of the most successful farmers in the community. But within my child's mind, I thought he was not very successful.
Mhm.
And that was why I always thought about becoming a trained farmer, an agricultural scientist. And that was, I think, what got me into university to study agriculture eventually. But interestingly, although my parents were crop farmers, I ended up studying animal science, which I have not regretted because animals don't live on animals, they live on crops. So it meant I had to study a lot of crop science too. Thank you.
Mm. Prof, that's a very interesting story. And with all due respect, would you consider yourself at the time as a very brilliant student? Were you just average, or respectfully, were you below average? How would you position yourself academically?
I think I was quite brilliant.
Okay.
For a start, I started primary school before most of my age mates at the time.
Mm,
And that was just coincidental, really. It wasn't because I was too brilliant. One of my aunties thought I was too big to just sit at home because I've ever been tall. And so she asked me to get up, get dressed, and go to school, even while my father and I protested that my age mates were still sitting at home. So I headed off to school, and I just discovered that I was brilliant. And yeah, I can't ever remember falling out of the top three in my class at any one time. So I would consider myself clearly above average.
your,
Thank
your
you.
ac- your academic credentials were quite stellar then. And just for our global audience, can you conceptualize the size of your parents' farming operation? When you say your parents were farmers, were they farming large hectares of land? How big was the farm, and how, in some sense, how wealthy in the village context was your family?
Uh, from a child's perception, we
Mhm.
thought we had a lot of farms
Okay.
because my father, for example, would have close to uh, 4 to 5 hectares of yams alone,
Mhm.
and then probably about the same size of land cultivated to rice. And my mom would be doing the women's kind of crops like peanuts and beans and cassava. And so they were quite big in the
Mm,
village context, but
mm.
having gone out and seeing what a commercial farm looks like, I would really classify them as peasant farmers,
I see.
nothing more than that. Yeah.
I see. So, and talking about going out, at what point after your education did you decide to leave Nigeria, and what were the motivating factors that instigated that transition? Can you talk to us about sort of your academic path within Nigeria, and when and why you decided to leave Nigeria to go abroad?
Um, I think going abroad, I thought was going to open my horizons
Hmm.
and broaden my mind. But initially, it wasn't a plan to stay away from the country. And that the evidence is quite clear because I did my first degree. I studied up to my first degree in Nigeria. I graduated with a first class from the University of Maiduguri. And then I actually started to do my master's in Nigeria, but I got a scholarship to the UK, what I think is called the DFID scholarships now. It used to be the ODA scholarships.
Hmm.
And with my distance, distant place vaccinations, I went to the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. You would hear many people wondered why I didn't go to England or any of the southern Scottish universities. Um, and I went home. I went back home after I completed my master's. Again, after I went to do my PhD in Australia at the University of Adelaide, I still finished and returned home. But I just gradually found out that I wasn't fitting very well with the use of the available facilities that I could find where I was working at Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria. I think that was what motivated me to move. And if you saw how attached I was to Africa, I didn't move out of Africa. I moved to South Africa. And I was quite happy working there for more than 5 years before circumstances again took me back to Australia. So I've always been itching to be in Africa, and I think that is why I have ended up in Fiji. I tend to call them little Nigeria or little Africa because the conditions are quite similar. So I have never really been one to leave the continent, and I have always been giving back, attending conferences, supporting scientists from there, and all the things I could do to just help them, lift them up. Thank you.
Prof, you've had quite a journey from Nigeria to Scotland, England, and back to South Africa, and then to Australia, and almost all over the place. And I think,
Yeah.
looking back, looking back, and most of our audience might be sort of younger, maybe a little younger than you are in that sense,
Yeah.
and at different places in your career. When it came to making those decisions, whether to stay or to leave, or whether to go back to Nigeria or leave Nigeria for South Africa, what were some of the motivating factors for you? What were some of the issues that, in looking back, drove you to make those decisions, and what were some of the lessons that you learned in at those stages of your career in terms of moving from one job or one place to the other?
Yeah. Thanks, Albert. I think money wasn't the primary reason, I would definitely say. Making an impact in my career, yeah, was more, I think, the most compelling reason for me to move. Like I pointed out to you, when I returned to Nigeria twice after my master's and PhD, if the facilities were there that would have enabled me to do my research, I would have stayed. So I think the most compelling reason was the need to grow my career, my academic career. But it was quite a difficult decision because I miss home. Up till now, I still miss home. I'm still much a village boy at heart. I would like to retire and go back to the village and sit on my farm. I think that would be my crowning moment, to just sit on my farm and look back at my academic career rather than just hang around in the world, or people tell me to build a house in Abuja or Makurdi, my state capital. I'm not going to do any of that. That will be, if my family members are hearing that, they will be quite disappointed. But I won't do that. I'm going to go and sit there in the village with them because that is where I belong. My heart is. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, good. And I think for somebody who has had that level of exposure and international experience to that extent, how were you able to gain acceptance in all these countries? There's a lot of discussion, particularly among sort of the African community abroad, of almost that social transition. And you work in South Africa, you work in Australia, you work in Scotland. How were you able to adapt to all those like different contexts? Were there any lessons from those exposures that you'd want to share with our listeners today? how did you get accepted? How did you fit in all those different countries as you worked along your career?
Yeah, thanks, Albert, for that question. I have tried to write on that, mostly to motivate the young people. If you have something to offer, the world will accept you. But that is not to say they are not going to be pockets of resistance to you, especially as an African. Just be sure there will be pockets of resistance. And but how would you recover from those kinds of resistance? First of all, I would like the African youth to remember that discrimination is human nature. It's not racism is not the only kind of discrimination that you would encounter in the world, which is why if you are sitting there in Ghana or Nigeria or South Africa or Zimbabwe or Senegal, you will still be seeing discrimination between different ethnic groups. And when you drill down to the ethnic groups, if you are talking to the Yorubas, they will tell you, or Hausas, or I'm calling names, or Zulus, or whatever, you will soon realize that they will tell you, okay, we are all Zulus, but our Hausas, or Yorubas, or Igbo, but this particular area, they are not very clever. They are dumb. And has nothing to do with race. These are people of the same color, same race, same language. So we should always be aware that there is going to be discrimination. Some people do it to put you down. But again, the second thing I tell the youth, the young people about is that it is people who are uncomfortable with themselves that discriminate. That is, they want to, they feel so low that they want to pitch at a higher level. And so they have to look for somebody who they think is below them. So somebody just telling you you are black or you are this, you are African, you are from this community, and they are not very clever there. The person may not be better than you in any way. It's just a matter of trying to feel better by their own by their own deficiencies, to free themselves from their own deficiencies. So that is what the young people should always hold dear to their heart. I have taught classes in Nigeria, South Africa, Australia, here in Fiji. I'm acceptable. And but that is not to say there are those who are not there to just say, oh no, it's just he thinks too much about himself. There will always be those comments. Uh, don't focus on those ones. Focus on the people that have accepted you, and you will find that by and large they will be the greater majority, not the minority. So that is what I will have to say with my experience around the world.
Thank you,
Thank
Professor.
you.
That's very well said. And you said something that really rang the bell for me. When you said that you have to make sure that you have something to offer. And
Yeah,
it almost sounds like that issue of value addition. Um,
yeah.
how do we bring ourselves to that? I mean, most of us are relatively new in our careers, starting our careers. It could be academic, it could be non-academic. Looking back at your own professional journey, how were you intentional in making sure that you brought something to the table? How did you do that for yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Albert. There is a need for people to read, or these days,
Hmm.
getting knowledge is quite easy now, unlike my time when you just had to read books. The internet is full of knowledge. And so there is a need for people to get knowledge. And that is by listening to different kinds of people, different classes of people. And some of them, one could call them mentors. But you find sometimes that you couldn't really correctly call some people mentors because you may be about the same age. But you find that they are useful in what you gain from them. And one person that I watched over time is a religious figure, or was a religious figure, was Dr. Miles Monroe of the Bahamian Faith Ministries.
Right.
Nothing to do with religion. I just found he was a very good motivational speaker. And he spoke a lot. His videos are still there on YouTube and elsewhere. He spoke a lot about leadership. And something I found out from him is that everyone is a leader. It has nothing to do with your professional line. Everyone is a leader. And leadership is defined by one expressing some of your strongest skills. Once you express your strongest skills, you will lead in those areas. And then he went on to explain how you would find your strongest skills. And it's quite enlightening. You would it quotes a lot from the Bible, which I'm not going to dwell upon here, but leaders have something to offer, and then they gain followership. They would always go to them to ask them questions. That is when people are asking you questions in particular areas, those could be your strong skills and where you could probably profess your leadership. But again, there will be those who will try to put you down. And they say, oh, he's so cocky. He thinks he knows all about astrophysics. He knows about all about agriculture. He knows all about maths. Just be aware, those could be your strong points. Develop them. And you are going to soon find that you are rising and becoming a leader in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I really like how you have sort of framed the concept of where areas where people criticize you, and it almost seems like you are encouraging us to use those areas of critiques as pointers to our areas of strength, which I think is a very good conceptualization of that. And talking about leadership in your own career, how did you move from being a university lecturer professor to being a university administrator? I heard administrators are paid very well. Was that the motivation?
Definitely not. I've always, money has never moved me. I always pray jokingly to God to give me more money so that I can share it, so that I can distribute it. I wouldn't really be very comfortable as a multimillionaire or even a dollar millionaire because I wouldn't be able to sleep. Honestly, I would just be thinking about the money and how to share it.
Right.
So yeah, so that money is never the motivational factor, but in academics is the normal thing, the normal pattern or path of growth is to start off as a tutor or assistant lecturer, rise to full lecturer, and then maybe assistant professor, depending on the country, or senior lecturer, and then becoming a reader or what they call associate professor, and then becoming a professor. And by the time you get to that point, and I always tell people that one should be aware of whether he or she is already a professor or not. People offering that title, I don't think makes a professor. It is by the time one is a professor, you would actually know that you are a professor because you will be operating on autopilot in your area of profession. So that is the norm. And by the time you get to that point, you actually feel an itch to then teach other people to lead. I mean, now leave the classroom and lead the development of academia, develop the processes, the programs, the people, the facilities that you think will be needed to then release the force of that professional area. I think that is exactly why I thought I was ready for leadership. The first point being that I was a coordinator of postgraduate programs because I saw myself as very comfortable with student supervision. So that was why I started. Thank you.
And then from that postgraduate coordinator, you move into some other
I, be,
higher.
I
Okay.
became a dean of a college that covered, still covers agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and veterinary science. That was a challenge because you would then discover yourself being more of an agricultural scientist than a forestry professional or fisheries or a veterinary scientist. But what is required at that level, as I pointed out, is to develop the teaching capability of the academic staff within that college, develop the facilities that they would use, try to link them to research grants, and try to guide them how to publish papers, academic papers, which mostly are not very discipline dependent. There is some link to or differences between disciplines, but within the primary industries of agriculture, forestry, fisheries, or veterinary science, the techniques are almost about the same. So, and then after that, the university asked me to act for some time as the Pro-Vice-Chancellor in charge of research and innovation, which then took me to look after the entire university in research areas of the or research delivery. So that is how I have grown from one point to the other. Thank you.
That's a very incremental incremental growth path.
It's a long journey. Academics is a very long journey. It's not something, it's like the military. I call it the military side of civil life.
Wow.
Yeah, you don't jump from a private in the army to a general in 5 years. We have seen that happen in Africa sometimes, but
Right.
you would always see the disaster that would follow.
And how long have you been on this academic path? A couple decades?
More than a couple. Have been I've been in academics since 1987. So that is like is it 36 years or 37 years? So
Wow.
it's a long journey, very long journey. Yeah, I
That's
became a professor. I became a professor at the age of 50, I think 52. Yeah, yeah. So which I wasn't a young professor
Mhm.
by any standard. There are people who have become professors at 30 something or 40 something. But I think my journey has also been quite long
Mhm.
of starting things and stopping and moving in another direction.
Mhm. Oh, good.
Thank you.
How is a day for you in Fiji? How is life there? Are you living in your little paradise? Do you enjoy
I wish I could have the time to enjoy the paradise, but yeah, for Africans who are listening to me, I find the Pacific quite fascinating. You have three different sets of people, or four, I would say. You have within the South Pacific, you have the Melanesian who claim that they came from Africa, And yes, the history has proven them right.
Mm-hmm.
Like the group here in Fiji, say they originated from Tanganyika, which is mainland Tanzania. And you could see some of the relationships in culture and the language between them and some of the groups I have seen in Tanzania. Then you have the Polynesians and the Melanesians. Those are the lighter skinned people. Then, of course, they brought in for Fiji, a large Indian population who came in about 150 years ago to work on the sugar and tobacco plantations. They were brought by the British colonialists.
Mm.
So they have settled here. And so it is a melting pot of cultures and a very peaceful place to show, just to give you an idea how peaceful Fiji is. The police are not armed, and you don't find that in many countries of the world.
Right.
They do have guns somewhere in the armory, I would think. You don't see them carrying guns on the hip or carrying the rifles across the shoulder or anything like that. So the place is quite idyllic and peaceful, laid back, and that is why I think a lot of Australians and New Zealanders are coming over here to retire.
Mm. And do you get your eba or pounded yam or whatever Nigeria? Like, is there like a small Nigerian restaurant where you go for the odd dish or dinner?
No, we don't. We still don't have an African restaurant here. But the
I
good
see.
thing is that you would find almost everything we have, especially in West Africa. Around
Okay.
here, there are lots of cassava.
Okay.
There isn't a lot of yams, but there is. You can find yams in the market. Instead, what they have is what we call cocoyam in West Africa,
Right.
which some people call taro, or here it's called dalu or dalu. And then you have okra, lots of vegetables, spinach, tropical spinach,
Mm.
and yeah, lots of things that are so similar. And so, if you are the type that can cook, yes, you can have everything you need here
Interesting.
for your food. Yeah.
Interesting. Um, Professor, this will be my last question. Um, and I know you mentioned during the course of our conversation that you have your heart is in Africa, irrespective of whichever part of the world you are, your heart has always been in Africa. And
Yeah.
I want us to imagine a young African about your age when you were growing up in the village and going to primary school and looking on that wall with all those countries and imagining himself maybe following your path, what would be the advice for him? And I ask this because increasingly we are seeing a lot of young people moving from the global south to the global north. What would be your advice for all these young people from those lenses? As a professor, as a higher ed admin, as all the things that you have achieved in your career, what would be your advice for the young African looking at that map somewhere in Nigeria, Ghana, Zimbabwe, South Africa, or anywhere else on the continent?
Yeah, thanks, Albert. I feel very pained because Africa has more resources than any other region or continent in the whole world. If you look, it starts from our climate. We have the best climate, and we have the largest arable land in the whole world. We have the largest body of fresh water in the whole world. We have the largest population of young people in the whole world. So, but our leaders have not been able to harness these resources, which is why you have people coming from other parts of the world, from China, from India, from all over the place, and making life in Africa, making money in Africa. You look at our plants there in West Africa, we have moringa, we have bitter leaf. You know, the Americans are encapsulating this. They are making capsules from moringa and bitter leaf and selling a bottle at several dollars. I'm not going to talk about the old familiar crops like cocoa or yams or whatever, but some of these things that grow quite readily. So it's so sad that young people are moving out of the global south, especially moving out of Africa, which is why some of us have been writing. We need to, for those who have the resources, we need to create livable villages, not just build a house there and live. If you go to some of the villages now in Nigeria, they look like cities, but people can't live there because there is no industry, there is nothing to give life to the people. So the youth leave the village and they go and squat in the slums around the cities. I think we need to build our rural areas and then provide jobs for the youth. And gradually, we will command the world because they will be coming to buy at our own terms, rather than selling off cheap products and then buying back very expensive finished products. But we need to try and become more purposeful, more focused in making money from our resources in Africa. And I think we will be fine. We don't need to go anywhere before we make it in life. Thank you.
Wow, that's a very good way to end our discussion today. I have learned a lot from you, from your stories, from your professional careers, from your life experiences. It has been a very pleasant conversation for me, and I'm sure my listeners have also really enjoyed hearing from you. So, thank you very much, Professor. It's been a pleasure spending my Saturday morning with you. And I hope that we'll have you back again in the future to talk about some of your passions and maybe some of your ongoing projects as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. So thank you to the young people, the bloggers who are using all this technology now to listen, to bring Africans to Africa. So thank you so much. And it has been a pleasure spending my Saturday evening in Fiji talking to you, Albert.